Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. I'm so glad you're joining us, and I'm pretty certain that it's hot wherever you're joining us from. Summer has hit hard, and it's hot all over, but there's also World Cup happening. I want to give a special shout out to Daniel Ferguson and the team at the Archdiocese of Suffolk in the London area, just south of the Thames. It's appropriate that you're joining us today because Daniel is on the evangelization team there at the Archdiocese. And we worked together last year, helping create workshops for their deaneries to provide for their parishioners to grow in evangelization. So excited that you're joining us today as well. We are going to go on to our topic, which is effective evangelization. And I am going to be your sole panelist today. I'm going to be sharing from my experience in this area, working with parishes. And one thing that I do that especially dioceses might be interested in is cohorts of parish teams within a diocese. And we meet 4 times over 18 months. And each of those gatherings, the teams learn, they plan, they evaluate, they discern, and they create a plan for the next 6 months to a year of their parish. And the last meeting of that cohort is on evangelization. So I'm giving you a very condensed version of that last cohort meeting. I actually have a last meeting with the Diocese of Rockford coming up in just a couple months, and we'll be talking about this. So if you're joining us from Rockford, you're getting a head start on our meeting in August. So with that said, let's go to my slides here. Let's get going with our topic. Effective evangelization. Now, the way that we got to this topic is that over the last few months, I've been covering these 4 essential practices of thriving parishes. And if you've ever seen our book, Great Catholic Parishes, we interviewed 250 parish leaders around the country and identified 4 essential practices of parishes that thrive. And I've been going through each of these. So if you go back and look at our webinars on YouTube, there's a whole playlist of all our previous webinars. You'll see that we talked about shared leadership, co-responsibility and action. That's key to a thriving parish. Fostering spiritual maturity. That is really intentionally helping people encounter Christ and grow in their faith instead of just putting them through programs. Our last webinar was Excelling on Sundays. How do we create a great weekend worship experience through hospitality, hymns, and homilies? And then today we are talking about evangelizing effectively. And what a relevant topic this is right now. I don't know how much you're looking at the news or what you hear about things that are happening in the church around the world, but there has been an increasing interest, not just in faith, but specifically, we've seen a growth in this interest in the Catholic faith in Gen Z. Gen Z's search for spirituality is renewing faith in America. Why is Gen Z returning to God? And as we look at the trends of people disaffiliating and people affiliating, we see disaffiliation going down and we see affiliation going up. People choosing to identify as a part of a faith community. And just this morning, some of you may know, I like to watch the Today Show. Just this morning on the Today Show, there was an entire segment on young adults heading back to Mass. Carson Daly, one of the hosts of the Today Show, who is a Catholic, did a whole segment with young Catholics, specifically in New York, that are doing something called Pizza to the Pews and how young adults are coming back to Mass. That's exciting. That is not the news we were reporting 10 years ago. That's not the news we were reporting 5 years ago. Now, we could get into a big discussion about why this is happening, but I want to ask you this question. As people come back, specifically young adults, Gen Z, what are they going to find when they come to your parish? Are they going to find people that are welcoming, that are formed in their faith, that are eager to help someone else in their faith journey? Are they going to find people that are open to discussing questions and doubts? Or are they going to find people that say, you're sitting in my pew? Or if you disagree with us, you can't be a part of this. Are they going to find that? Or are they going to find people that engage them in conversations and help them navigate their faith journey. So we're going to get into that, but I want to start by asking a few questions. One is, what do you think of when you hear evangelization? I'd love it if a few of you would just answer in the Q&A there, would just put what you think of when you hear the word evangelization. I'm imagining that most of you on this webinar have positive responses to this word evangelization. That's why you're on the webinar. You work in an evangelization office. You may have a gift or a charism of evangelization. It's something that you enjoy doing, sharing your faith. Kathy says knocking on doors. There's a lot of people that think that when they think of evangelization. And that's why I want to ask you the second question. What do your parishioners think of when you talk about evangelization? Michelle, good to see you on here. Michelle said spreading the gospel. Deacon Nick said conversation. I would imagine that your parishioners might have some stronger reactions to the word evangelization. They might think about this. They might think that you're wanting them to dress a certain way and go door to door, like Kathy said, asking people, can I tell you about Jesus? They might think of someone on a street corner preaching at them, yelling at them. Deacon Nick said parishioners are afraid of the word, it seems. I get it. I understand. If you're old enough, you might think about this, right? You might think of televangelists. And I don't think any of those images are attractive, right? I love this description of evangelization that I heard once, and it's so simple. It's not super theological, but it's relatable. And I heard someone say evangelization is simply one beggar telling another where they found some bread. One beggar telling another where they found some bread. That puts us in a place of humility. It puts us on the same level with the people that we're talking to. And we are sharing with them about the bread of life, about what has made our life abundant, something they might be hungry for. So I want to emphasize that true evangelization is not just informational. It is incarnational. Now, what does that mean? Incarnation means us being the embodiment of Christ. It means us being the hands and feet of Christ, the voice of Christ, the word of Christ with the people around us. It is living as Eucharistic people. Now, that is much more attractive and beautiful, and I believe true, than the misconceptions that people have about evangelization that might cause them to shy away from evangelization. Now, why do we evangelize? If you've watched this enough, you know why is my favorite question. But I want to give you a theological foundation for this and a foundation in the writings of the church. You know, the first reason is that Jesus called us to go share the gospel. He called us to go and make disciples. Well, you can't make disciples without sharing the gospel with them, the kerygma, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. That's discipleship, right? But Pope St. Paul VI, which is probably the most famous pope when it comes to evangelization, said this. He said, the church's very existence is rooted in the task of evangelization. Our very existence. And of course, Pope Francis said that by virtue of our baptism, we're all missionary disciples. That word missionary gives this idea that we are to go and tell, right? But I want to go on with Pope St. Paul VI, because he said the church exists by her very nature to be the people of the gospel. She's called to proclaim the good news, to make known the mystery of Christ, to bring the light of salvation to every corner of the world, and to lead souls to the fullness of communion with God. Evangelizing is, in fact, the grace and vocation proper to the church, her deepest identity. She exists in order to evangelize. That is to say, in order to preach and teach and to be the channel of the gift of grace to reconcile sinners with God. That's not a message that we hear often on Sunday, is it? But it's true, and it's for all of us. We are the church. Evangelizing means bringing the good news into all the strata of humanity, and through its influence, transforming humanity from within and making it new. Someone earlier asked, it would be good for us to frame a context of what we mean by evangelization. And I think Pope St. Paul VI here does it really well. It means bringing the good news of salvation through Jesus Christ for all people into the strata of humanity, through its influence, transforming humanity from within and making it new. I love that he adds that it's a process of transformation from the inside out. It's not about behavior modification. It's not about, pray, pay, and obey. It's about being transformed by Jesus, having an encounter with him, and growing in our faith is what we want for people. So let's talk about effective evangelization. How do we do that today in today's world? And as we do that, I want to look at 2 modes and 2 methods. And I'll explain what I mean by that, and I think you'll see where it all fits together. When I say 2 modes, what I mean is 2 ways of being as we evangelize, 2 ways that we evangelize. And then the methods are the specific tactics that we use in that, or strategies, you might call them. 2 evangelization modes found in the gospel are come and see and go and tell. Come and see and go and tell. And as I show you these, I think you'll understand what I mean. The woman at the well, which is one of my favorite gospel stories. There's so much in that story. It's so rich. But in this story, this woman encounters Jesus. She has a profound encounter with him. And it says, then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way to Jesus. And it says that many in her village came to know Christ because of her. She went back to her people and said, come and see this man that I encountered that changed my life. In another gospel story, we see that Jesus healed a man, and the man who'd been freed from the demons begged to go with him, but Jesus said to him, no, go and tell your family everything God has done for you. So he went all through the town proclaiming the great news of the things that Jesus had done for him. So you see, he was sent to go and tell people about me. He had an encounter with Jesus, and he was told to go and bear witness, share your story of what I've done for you. So the 2 evangelization modes I want you to think of in this bigger picture of parish evangelization are come and see and go and tell. Another go and tell is that first scripture we started with, what's known as the Great Commission, where Jesus said, go and tell people about me. So we know that we are commanded to do that, but we can also invite people to come and see and experience Jesus for themselves. So these 2 work together. So I said from there, I want to look at methods of effective evangelization. And I want to give you 3 methods that every parish should be thinking about. Evangelization is such a broad topic. People talk about the new evangelization. Is it people in the pews? Is it people outside of the pews? I want us to think about it in a more intentional and a more clear way, a more specific way. And I want us to think about these 3 methods that really every parish needs to be considering. And those are programs, personal, and then mercy and outreach. And I will unpack each of those for you. Again, I would appreciate any of your questions that you have while we're working through this. Kathy said, I think my parishioners don't believe it's their job to evangelize, and we're about to get to that. So let's talk about what we mean by evangelization programs. Evangelization programs are a come and see experience where we invite people to come to the parish, and it's a safe place for people to explore the faith, share their questions and doubts, hear the gospel, and encounter Christ. It is the entry-level program. It is for people, everyone from a cradle Catholic that never really had a relationship with Christ to an atheist or an agnostic or someone who has no religious background whatsoever. Where do we send those people? If the only place you have to send them is OCIA, that's a problem, right? That's next level. That's not just a place for people that are curious or a place for people that are open and questioning and interested but don't quite yet have trust or real confidence in who Christ is, where do we send those people? So I believe evangelization programs that are specifically created for this should be a small group accompaniment model, not where they're just sitting in rows of chairs listening to information, but they have a chance to discuss things, process them. It's somewhere that people get personally invited to. You know, you can advertise this, you can market it to your parish, but you will hear me say time and time again, there is no substitute for personal invitation. And then lastly, it's a come and see experience. It is where people can come and observe and talk if they want to, but they don't have to. But they're going to see Jesus, the kerygma, clearly presented. And having that very accessible level of conversation about Jesus in the gospel is important. This is not a place for like deep doctrinal discussions. So I'll give you some suggestions of ones that I'm familiar with that I've seen have great success. Probably many of you are familiar with Alpha. It's an 11-week course. You can shorten it if you want to. I've led an Alpha. We shortened ours a little bit. But it goes through some very basic topics. The first session is just, is there more to life than just this? Why were you created? Is there a purpose in your creation? And then it simply talks about who Jesus is, why Jesus died, how can you have faith, how do you pray? Why and how do I read the Bible? Very simple things. How does God guide us? And Alpha, in a Catholic context, provides you with all the resources for this. There are videos, there are training videos for your teams, and there's everything you need to know about Alpha, and it's all free. As I said, I hosted one of these. I facilitated it. We did a retreat about halfway through. And I want to tell you about my friend Jennifer, who came to Alpha. Jennifer had no religious background whatsoever. She sat at my table. I was her table host. Both of her parents were deceased. She had never gone to church. And we came to this session on how do I pray? And we opened it up for people to talk about their experience with prayer. And Jennifer said, I've never prayed. And I said, what do you mean you've never prayed? You've never just said, God, help me? I mean, I even know when I was in college and I'd had a few too many drinks and was feeling sick, I'd say, God, if you get me out of this, I'll follow you forever. Did you ever have just one of those desperation prayers, any kind? She said, I've never prayed. I didn't know that I could. I grew up in a family where we didn't talk about God. I didn't think I was one of God's people. And so we had this session on prayer. And at the end, there's a homework assignment to go home and pray. And one of the priests that are in the video says it really simply. He says, prayer, keep it real, keep it simple, and keep it going. That's my teaching on prayer. Just talk to God, be honest, keep it simple, and keep it going. So Jennifer said, I'm going to try to go home and pray. So the next evening, I got an email from Jennifer. And she said, I have to tell you about what happened to me today. She said, first of all, last night I went home and I tried to pray. And I said, God, this is Jennifer. Just kidding. I can't do this. I'm sorry. Bye. And she said that was her first attempt at prayer. And she said, when I went to bed, I thought, I'll try again tomorrow. Every day is a new beginning. And so she, the next morning, tried to pray. And again, she was scared. And she said, I'm going to try writing down my prayer. And then I'll try to pray it. And she sent me her prayer. And I'm not going to read it to you. It was very personal. But it had such heartfelt questions like, God, how are my parents? God, what do you think about people like me who didn't grow up knowing you? Are you happy that we're trying to know you now? Or are you upset that we are not your people? I mean, there are people out there that have these questions, and they need to be accompanied gently and kindly and compassionately. And as she went on, she said, will you please give my parents a hug? Thank you for bringing me to Alpha. Thank you for this church, Jennifer. And in her email, she said, after I read through my letter to God, I realized that I had just prayed for the first time. Now, I want you to know that Jennifer is a manager of a cafeteria in a hospital. And this young woman who had never prayed before has since had a conversion, been baptized, joined a women's small group. And now every day when she comes to work, her first question for all of her employees is, how can I pray for you today? That's the impact that an evangelization program can have, but there are some things that are really important for it to work that way. I'll share with you a few more and we'll talk about why they fail sometimes and how they would best succeed. The Rescue Project is Father John Riccardo. It's similar to Alpha. It's a different flavor of that. I encourage you to go to their website and check it out. You want to find the one that's best for your parish. ChristLife is similar to Alpha. It's specifically Catholic. It's a longer process. It's not free, but it is great. It is divided into 3 sections: discovering Christ, which is the kerygma; following Christ, which is discipleship; and then sharing Christ, which is teaching them to be disciples who make disciples and how to share their faith. So I love this one also. It's more Catholic and it's more involved, but it has had great success. Father Frank Fana, who I had on here last month, he has been helping lead ChristLife for years, and they have just continued to grow as people go through ChristLife and then go invite others to come be a part of it. So encourage you to check those out. I don't know about the Rescue Project, but I know ChristLife and Alpha are both available in English and Spanish. So let's talk about this. Why did they often stall out or die? I meet a lot of people who say, we tried Alpha, it didn't work. On the Alpha website, there's a list you can pull up, and it's called 10 Ways to Kill Alpha. And I will say that whenever I talk to people where Alpha has failed, it is usually one of these things that they've done that are not in line with the way that Alpha is designed. And I would say same with ChristLife. Here's what I think is important, or why they often stall out or die. You have the wrong leaders. The leaders of an evangelization program need to be people who love talking to people who don't know Jesus. They need to be people that are patient. They need to be people that are open. They need to be people that welcome discussion and aren't dogmatic in their approach of talking to others. They listen, they ask questions. If this is a bunch of people who love watching videos about doctrine and theology and debating it, wrong people. They're wrong people. So look for people who have a charism of evangelization and would love to help others with that. The second thing is you just invite the usual suspects. You just announce it to your parish, and the people that go to every program that you ever put on show up. And after they've gone through it, you don't have anybody else to go through it because they're just consumers of programs. And this is what happens is those are people that are not inviting others to come. So if you're not inviting people outside of the usual suspects, if you're not inviting people outside of your parish, you're going to run the course. It's going to be a program that people went through and then they're done. And then lastly, they skip key elements, as I said. They don't provide a meal. They say, well, let's just do a snack. No, it starts with a meal, sitting around a table with others. All 3 of these programs start with a meal. Maybe they skip the retreat. I know some parishes do the retreat on location. I would do it at an offsite, even if you just do it for a day. Don't do it in the usual place. If you can do an overnight, I encourage you to try that. So those are some ways I see them usually stall out or die. I'd love to help you. If you're struggling to get evangelization programs going, email me, john@greatcatholicparishes.org. I'd love to talk to you about it. So how do we get started or relaunch? If we don't have one or want to try doing one again, or we want to resuscitate one, I would start small. Bring together a team of people that you think would be great for it, personally invite them to be involved, and just take them through the program. Take the time for them to get familiar with it, to experience it. And then they can become your table hosts when you roll this out to a larger audience. Too often we start something like this on a parish-wide level with people who've never done it before as our leaders. And that's not a great way to start anything. So start small, maybe as just one small group, right? And let it grow from there. Build a team of people who believe in it and have experienced it and that are people that are going to invite others. Invest in it. Don't do it the cheapest way possible. Of course, there's a way to do things on a budget. The meals can be something that people from the parish prepare and bring, or you can get takeout, or you can get it catered. I know that with the Alpha that I led, our first few sessions, we brought food from a Mexican restaurant nearby. And after those sessions, I had a couple of leaders come up to me and say, hey, we would be happy to provide the meal. Could we provide the meal? Suddenly, we had a zero budget program that's helping people encounter Jesus. So look at how you could do that. And then most important thing is invite people to do next steps. So if you bring them to an Alpha or a ChristLife or a rescue project, know ahead of time what you're going to invite them to that's a small next step, some sort of small group or a book study. Someone said, our parish loves book clubs. Well, what would be a good book for someone who's just gone through this kerygma process? What's great is because they've already been in a small group setting for the last couple of months, they're familiar with that, they're comfortable with it, and bringing them into a small group with others who've been in that with them is much more inviting than starting into a new small group where they don't know anybody, right? So invite them to next steps, have a plan for their next steps that you're going to invite them to. Don't just tell them, okay, now come to Mass. And then lastly, don't give up. Never despise small beginnings. Can I tell you a secret about that Alpha that Jennifer was in? It was a small Alpha. And when we got to the retreat, Jennifer was the only person in the Alpha that was not already a disciple of Jesus. But we hung in there for Jennifer. We stayed in there, and look at the life transformation that happened. Now Jennifer leads a small group, and that group of people was so energized and inspired by what they saw happen in Jennifer's life that they wanted to keep going and grow it. So don't give up. I had a question before we leave this area of evangelization programs. I've had a couple people ask, is Why Catholic a good program? Or is it good for this? I think Why Catholic's a good program, but for what I'm talking about, it is really big and extensive and long and more theological. And I think it would be a great program after Alpha or after ChristLife. Bring them into Why Catholic. They're willing to make a longer commitment at that point, and they're hungry to grow deeper in their faith. So let's go to the next method that I mentioned, which is personal evangelization. And what I mean by personal evangelization is exactly what someone said earlier that parishioners don't think their responsibility is. And that is people personally sharing the gospel with friends, family, coworkers, neighbors. St. Peter in 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you about the hope that you have inside. And I highlighted that in red, the hope that you have inside, because that's going to be a theme here as we talk about personal evangelization. Again, Pope St. Paul VI said, the person who has been evangelized goes on to evangelize others. Here lies the test of truth, the touchstone of evangelization. It is unthinkable that a person would accept the word and give themselves to the kingdom without becoming a person who bears witness to it and proclaims it in turn. It's this truth that if we really believe that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, and that he has changed our life, and that he gives people, that he came to give people abundant life, why would you keep that a secret? Why wouldn't you tell other people about it? He says that modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses. And in personal evangelization, we're not asking people so much to be teachers. We're asking them to be witnesses. And there is some teaching in that maybe, but primarily it's them sharing their own story of their experience with Christ. Pope Benedict said, a great effort must therefore be made in order for all Christians to transform themselves into witnesses, ready and able to testify always and to everyone to the hope that animates them. And again, I'm going to highlight that last line, to the hope that animates them. Do you remember we heard that from St. Peter, for the hope that lives inside of them? I want you to hold that right there, because I want to talk about two barriers to forming missionary disciples. What are two barriers to forming disciples who feel called and compelled to go tell others? Where they don't think, well, it's not my job, I'm just a parishioner. They think it is my job because I'm a disciple of Jesus. What keeps parishioners from accepting and believing in that truth? I want to say that I, from my experience, have seen two barriers to that have been belief and culture. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. And I want to do that, I want to use a little illustration here, and I want you to participate this. In the Q&A, I want to ask you to type in the Q&A, what is a product you love that you have spontaneously told others about? What is a product that you love that you have spontaneously told others about? I'm going to go off camera here and give you a second to respond to that question. All right, we're getting some good ones. Let me share these with you where we're at. Let's see, truthfully, that's great. I did a webinar on AI. They were great. Scrub Daddy. Do we have any Scrub Daddy? Any other Scrub Daddy fans out there? Diet Coke, Lisa. I'm with you, but for me, it's Coke Zero. I've got mine right here. Deep Blue. It's an essential oil rubbed for aches, pains, and arthritis. Wow, I need that one. Michelle, I'm going to check that out. Mushroom coffee. I tried it. I couldn't do it. All right. I think we got some Nothing Bundt cakes. Oh, man. Their white chocolate raspberry or whatever that is amazing. Here's some others I've seen. Anybody a fan of the Magic Eraser? I'm telling you, the first time I used one of these on white sneakers and on white baseboards, it was like, what is this? Is this even legal? Does this have some kind of voodoo properties? Because I've never seen anything clean white stuff like Magic Eraser. Nespresso. If you love a great coffee at home, but you don't want to have a full barista setup, Nespresso, I mean, for my money, it's the best coffee you can make at home. And then CrossFit, the keto diet, these two, you don't have to ask people if they do them because they will tell you within the first 5 minutes that you meet them. They are evangelists for these things. Now, what do all these things have in common? These people have a belief in this product because it changed their life. They experienced it and it changed their life for the better. And they want other people's lives to be changed for the better as well, right? Do you see this? Those of you that put these products in here, Nothing Bundt cakes, all these other things, their Kindle, mushroom coffee, diet, Scrub Daddy. Did you go to a workshop to learn how to tell people about Scrub Daddy? Did the company pressure you at all and say, you have to tell people about Scrub Daddy? No, they didn't. You did it joyfully because of what it did for you, right? You wanted other people to have that same experience. Pope Francis says all the baptized, whatever their position in the church or the level of instruction in the faith, are agents of evangelization. Every Christian is a missionary. Now listen to this. To the extent that he or she has encountered the love of God in Christ Jesus. So your level of being a missionary, the extent to which you are a missionary, is proportional to the level that you've encountered the love of God in Christ. I think one of the problems we've had with evangelization is we have a lot of parishioners who've not had a personal encounter with Christ. We have a lot of people in the pews that don't have a story to tell. Yes, they went through the sacraments. They memorized what they were supposed to memorize. They've probably forgotten it all by now. They're committed to the institution. But have they had a life-changing encounter with Jesus? Because that's where people begin to evangelize. I want to go back to the woman back. Encounter inspires evangelization. When people have had an encounter with Jesus, the most natural thing for them is to tell others about it. I think about people that come out of OCIA or one of these evangelization programs, and they want other people to experience it. So the second thing I said was culture, right? Belief and culture. When I say culture, I mean that there are often people who have had an encounter with Jesus and have a vibrant faith, but because of Catholic culture, they are afraid to talk about their faith. They feel like they shouldn't. They're not supposed to proselytize. They are afraid, or they feel like they're not equipped. And I want to share a story with you about an experience that I had in Colorado. I was on my way to work with a parish in Steamboat Springs, and I was in Winter Park, and I went mountain biking. I had 2 major surgeries in my life, and they were both a result of visits to Colorado. This mountain bike trip was great. We were in Winter Park. I was going to mountain bike for a couple of days and then go up to Steamboat and work with this parish. And on my last run of the day, I just got a little overconfident. And I, as the kids would say, I sent it. And boy, did I ever. And I ended up in the clinic at the bottom of the mountain with a broken wrist. And as this woman was bandaging me up and putting me in a sling, I noticed that she had on a St. Christopher medal and a crucifix. And she also had on a bracelet that said forgiven. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, I'll tell you one thing I like to do when people are wearing Christian stuff is I like to kind of mess with them and give them an opportunity to share their faith, right? Just ask some kind of dumb questions, softball questions to see what they do. So I said, hey, I love your bracelet. Why do you wear that? She kind of hid it behind her back and was like, oh, I don't know. A friend just gave it to me. I was like, that's weird. She seems like embarrassed of her bracelet now. And I said, why did they give it to you? And she said, I don't know. They just thought it's something I should remember. And I said, okay. So I was just going to stop there. So a few minutes later, she said, what brings you to Colorado? And I said, well, funny you should ask. I'm on my way to Steamboat Springs to work with a parish there. And she lit up and she said, oh, I love Father Ernest. His homilies are the best. That's a great parish. It's so beautiful. You know, sometimes I go up to a women's group up there, and then I also, don't tell Father Ernest, but sometimes I go to the non-denominational worship night for young adults there. And she gets, lit up. She clearly had a belief. She clearly had an encounter with Jesus. But she had grown up in a culture where she was afraid to talk about it, even when asked. And I think she wore these things because she does want to be a light in the world, but she wasn't formed in it. She wasn't equipped, and it didn't seem normal to her. So I want to give you some tips for breaking through the barriers that your parishioners might have for becoming missionary disciples. This area of belief, we simply need to engage them with others who have an active and living belief. We need to put them in small groups with people that have a vibrant faith. We need to give them a chance for a personal encounter with Christ. We need to invite them to things like retreats. I think those are some of the best places for people to have a breakthrough, or a program like Alpha. We need to help nurture their faith and accompany them so they can grow in it, right? And we need to make sure that they know that part of knowing Jesus is telling others about Jesus. And so that's where the culture part comes in. We need to preach about all of these things I just shared with you, the writings of the church, the popes, the Gospels, what Jesus said. Do people know that to be a normal Catholic means to be someone who shares their faith, right? Who accompanies others. We need to provide training on how to share their faith, which is what we're going to get to next. We need to share faith stories in the parish, in the Mass even, share witnesses about people sharing their faith. We need to make it normal and simple for people to evangelize. It's not a weird thing. It's not a Green Beret next level Catholic thing. It's just what normal Catholics do. sharing stories of people sharing their faith, people saying, hey, I invited my coworker or my neighbor to Alpha, and here's what happened. Sharing those stories help them see, oh, I know that person. Oh, maybe it's not weird to tell people about my faith. So personal evangelization training, I believe it should be a parish-based program that equips people to share the gospel and their own story of encountering Christ. What's the difference between this and an evangelization program? Well, this one is speaking to people that are already disciples. They've already encountered Jesus. They want to grow in their faith, but it's equipping them. I think it also should be in a small group accompaniment model. It should be forming them spiritually, not just informing them on how to share their faith. And then lastly, it should be a safe place to learn and to practice. I mentioned that Daniel and I had worked on these workshops with his archdiocese on how to equip people for personal evangelization. And they did these things. They helped people really discern their own story and write down, what is my story of encountering Jesus and how he's changed my life and what my life is like today. And then they helped them narrow it down to just maybe a couple of paragraphs. And then they would practice with each other so that it would be comfortable sharing it. And then it would be more comfortable when they talk to someone outside of that group. So a few resources for that. I think this is a great one for a book study. Sister Terry Riccardo, the former president of Renew International, she has a book, Everyday Witness, 7 Simple Habits for Sharing Your Faith. I think this would be a great small group for helping people get more comfortable with sharing their faith. This is a very entry level. More of like a level 2, which is a more involved, lengthy program, is the Reach More program from Evangelical Catholic. Shout out to Jason Simon, great man, founded this program. This is really more in-depth evangelization training. So maybe after people go through Everyday Witness, they might want to get into Reach More, where they learn more how to disciple people after they've come into the faith. And then the last one is one of my favorites. It is so simple. It's a book called The Art of Neighboring. What if Jesus really meant we should love our actual neighbors? You know, the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And The Art of Neighboring says, how can we love our neighbor as ourselves if we don't really know them? It's a great small group study. I went through it with a group of people. We got to know neighbors that we'd never known before because we were intentional about it, because this book really challenged us to get to know our neighbors. And I want to share a story about my friend Ryan. Ryan believed that he was called to love his neighbors and to introduce them to Jesus if it was appropriate. And Ryan lived next door to this dad who was a lapsed Catholic, never went to Mass, but he identified himself as a Catholic. And one day on the neighborhood app, there was something that popped up that his neighbor, Mike, his neighbor's son was missing. And it was about 8 o'clock at night. The sun had been down for a couple of hours. He was supposed to come home before dinner. And he was really worried and upset. And Ryan, when he saw that, he prayed for Mike and Mike's son. And then he thought, maybe I should pray with Mike. So he went next door to Mike's house. Mike, who he had very little interaction with, and knocked on the door. Mike answered. And Ryan said, hey, I heard about your son. Can I pray with you for your son? And he said, yes. Now, I'm pretty sure that in any other scenario, Mike would have said, no, I don't want to pray with you. But Ryan saw a need in this man's life, and they sat down and prayed. And as they prayed, Mike's son walked in the front door. He was scared. He had stayed out past his curfew. He knew that he was going to be in trouble. He was actually hiding in a bush outside of the house. And he was happy to be home, and his dad was elated. Fast forward about a year later, and Ryan is talking to another Catholic, and he said something about his neighbor, Mike. And this person said, oh, you're that Ryan. And Ryan said, what do you mean? And he said, oh, I was at a men's retreat with Mike, and we were all sharing our stories of faith. And Mike shared how he came back to Christ and came back to the church when his neighbor Ryan prayed with him and his son came home. And now he goes to Mass every Sunday. He's in the men's group. He's in a small group. Ryan loving his neighbor in a simple way changed his life. So Tyler asked, who is The Art of Neighboring by? It's by Dave Runyon and Jay, I forget Jay's last name, but if you just Google Art of Neighboring Dave Runyon, there's actually an Art of Neighboring website. They have resources there. I encourage you to check it out. So the last method for evangelization is mercy and outreach. Now, you may not think of this traditionally as evangelization, and you may wonder, what am I talking about when I say mercy and outreach? I'm talking about reaching out to share the love of Christ by meeting people's needs in a practical way. And typically, this is people outside of your parish community, people in your neighborhood. This would be like a food pantry, nursing home visits, shut-in visitation, clothing or a food drive, a Christmas toy store, corporal acts of mercy, reaching out to meet needs of people in the community. But I love this saying, good works create goodwill, which opens hearts to the good news. Good works create goodwill, which opens hearts to the good news. I hope that you'll write that down. Because, while younger generations are beginning to be more attracted to the church, there's still a lot of baggage that people have out there with the church. There's still a lot of places that we don't have goodwill. But good works, loving people like Jesus did. Jesus fed people. He went and ate in the homes of people that were not, godly people. He healed people. He went and met people's practical needs in a real way. And what this saying means is that mercy and outreach is evangelistic. And the second thing I want you to think about is being creative in the ways that you meet the needs of your community. I think one of the most important things is to find out what the needs of your community are. Often people in our parish will say, I want to do this kind of outreach because I care about this thing. And it's about them. It's not about what the real needs of the community are. But this parish in Houston, after the hurricanes, I love this. They did a dog park and a kennel for people who had been moved into temporary housing and they weren't allowed to bring their dogs with them after the hurricane. I mean, listen, if you love your dog like I do, it's like a member of my family. And to think that it would have to be in some kind of kennel jail somewhere that nobody loved it and I couldn't see it would be heartbreaking. But these people provided a place for these pets to be while they were in temporary housing, in a place they could come play with them. What an incredible way to show that God loves you, God loves your animals. We're here to help. And then I wanted to share another creative thing that I got to be a part of. The city of Richardson here in the Dallas area has a program for houses that are violating code. So it could be painting, it could be the yard. I know this does not look like a poor house, but the city was still citing it for code violations because of the paint on the outside. So I went with a team from a church, and the city actually, in this program, they provided us with the supplies and with a liaison that helped us know what we were supposed to do. So you can see here, we scraped, we painted. It was just a group of young adults. This is what the house looked like when we were done. And the gentleman that lived there was a gentleman who his wife had passed away. He had become disabled and he wasn't able to work on the house, and his adult kids weren't helping him with it. And while we were having lunch out there, he came out and said, why would you come do this when my own kids don't want to help me out? And we just said, hey, we're just from a church. We just love God and we love people. And we heard that you were in need. Well, we didn't pressure him. We didn't share the gospel, but we did tell him where we were from. And guess who showed up for church the very next day? This gentleman. And he said, I had to see where these young people come from that would do such a thing for me. Good works created goodwill, which opened his heart to the good news. This is a great way to engage millennials and young families as well. In her book, Family Ministry, Diana Garland, she studied the 40% of kids who grow up in the church and actually stay in the church. We know that 60% go off to college and never go back to church. So she said one of the most common practices of families of the 40% who stay in the faith is that they served together, that kids and parents served together. And, I was talking to somebody today, and I know that they would be reluctant to be very involved in a family faith formation program as a parent, but they would be very excited to get their kids involved in serving, and they would even show up with their kids. But they want their kids to learn to give back. And so Good Faith is a ministry in New Jersey. I encourage you to check out. They have a program called Family Matters that actually infuses Catholic social justice teaching and outreach and service into their family faith formation model. Check them out. That'll be in the email that goes out after this. Catholic Heart Work Camp is another summer camp mission experience that you might consider checking out. Mercy and outreach is evangelistic. It's a great way to engage youth and families. Identify the needs in your community. Go to your mayor. Go to your community services and ask, are there any needs that aren't being met? Or is there somewhere that we could send volunteers where you're already doing something? Be creative. So I just want to circle back as we wrap up here. 3 methods of effective evangelization. Programs that are for people who don't yet know Jesus. Personal evangelization training and equipping our parishioners to share their faith and their witness, and then mercy and outreach. So programs are parish-based personal invitation, kerygma, curriculum, small group models. Personal training is where parishioners are being inspired and equipped to share their faith, growing spiritually, and getting a safe place to practice sharing their faith. In either of these, you could just start as a single small group. It doesn't need to be a big thing. And then mercy and outreach is meeting the practical needs of people in the name of Christ. Good works create goodwill, which opens hearts to the good news. So in wrapping this up, if you're wondering how you could take this information and do something with it, I encourage you to create a template like this. And I want you to think about what you might already be doing in these areas, but what you also need to do. And I want you to ask yourself, what programs do we have for someone who's curious about Jesus? Where could we send Jennifer that has no spiritual background, no formation, where she would be welcome, would hear the kerygma, and have a safe place to ask questions? I think as more people are coming back to church, you need a place for those people. How are we equipping our parishioners to share the gospel and to share their personal witness with others? If someone came to you today and said, I really want to learn how to share my faith, where would you send them that specifically helps them with that task? And then lastly, how are we helping parishioners share the love and message of Christ in a practical way? You may have a lot of outreach and mercy ministries out there. Are they being led by people who see their job as making disciples of the people that volunteer with them and sharing the love of Christ with others? Or is it just very transactional? Like it might as well be the Salvation Army or the soup kitchen down the street. Why is this ministry something that's evangelizing? You need leaders who have that kind of vision for it. So any other questions we have? We're at the end of our hour here, but I do want to answer any questions that you might have. I see that Kathy says they're starting Reach More this summer. That's fantastic. Ernesto asked for information about the Alpha program. I will be happy to send that to you. It'll be a link in the email that goes out after this, as well as a link to the Art of Neighboring book and all the other programs that I mentioned on here. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you will see evangelization in a new way. I hope that you will see it as being something that's not just informational, but is incarnational. It's a chance for us to be the message, to live out the love of God and the message of Christ, of his love for people. And also that you will see it as a way of being a Eucharistic people, that we are bringing the living water, the bread of life to people where they're at, meeting them where they're at, and hopefully loving them to Jesus. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, John at greatcatholicparishes.org. All right, take care. God bless.